My name is Ava Peters. I'm 29, single, child-free, and, if you ask my family, chronically underachieving in the ways that matter most. I knew this Christmas was going to unravel the moment I pulled into the driveway. You know that feeling when the air just feels off? The lights were glowing, the wreath was fresh, and snow was falling like a Hallmark movie was playing out on cue. But under all that glitter, I could already feel the cold wasn't just coming from outside. Before I dive in, if you've ever walked into a room full of people who claim to love you, but constantly make you feel like you don't belong, hit that subscribe button. Like and share if this story hits too close to home. You're not alone, and maybe my story can help someone draw their own line in the sand. Now, back to that driveway. My parents' house, a white Victorian estate perched on a hill in Asheville, North Carolina, is the kind of place people stop to admire. 3 floors, wraparound porch, antique rocking chairs no one actually sits in. Picture perfect on the outside. But to me, that house is a monument to forced smiles and carefully edited silence. It's where I learned how to laugh at jokes that hurt and shrink myself at the dinner table so others could feel big. Still, every year I came back. Out of guilt, out of hope, out of some broken belief that maybe this time would be different. I stepped out of my car, the crunch of snow under my boots the only sound in the stillness. I stood there for a beat too long, staring at the house like it might change shape if I waited. It didn't. Inside, I could already hear the chaos. My brother Jackson's laugh bounced off the hallway walls. His 3 boys were probably turning the living room into a war zone with foam swords, while his wife, Melanie, played referee. Then there was Lauren, my older sister, probably arranging her perfect little angel's coat on the banister just right so Mom could snap a photo for the Christmas card. I adjusted my scarf, took one last breath of cold air, and rang the doorbell. Barbara Peters, my mother, swung the door open like she was waiting for a camera crew. Her red sweater was coordinated with her lipstick, her smile too wide to be real. "Ava, sweetheart," she chirped, pulling me into a hug that lasted exactly 1.5 seconds too short. "You made it." "Would have taken a snowstorm to stop me," I replied, trying to keep it light. "Well," she said, stepping aside, "come on in. Everyone's already here." Translation: "You're late." The warmth of the house hit me like a wall, but not the comforting kind. It was thick with noise, with movement, with a kind of energy that made you feel like you'd walked in halfway through a play and no one paused to catch you up. I hung my coat and stepped into the chaos. Jackson was indeed holding court in the dining room, waving a bottle of wine while one of his sons crawled under the table. Lauren stood by the fireplace with a glass of Pinot, her baby on one hip, exchanging compliments with my mother about the centerpiece. No one noticed me at first. I might as well have been part of the wallpaper. Eventually, my dad's voice cut through the noise like a school bell. All right, dinner's just about ready. Jackson, get the boys settled. Lauren, can you help Mom with the salad?" I was still standing there when my mother returned from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a cloth napkin like she was on a cooking show. "Oh, Ava," she said, as if just now remembering I existed. "Would you mind sitting at the kids' table this year? It's just easier that way with the seating." I blinked. "The kids' table?" "Yes, it's right in the sunroom. We set it up with some holiday crafts and cute little paper plates. It'll be fun." Fun. I glanced through the archway. The adult table was laid out like a magazine spread, china, candles, cloth napkins folded like swans. My place was, with the Play-Doh and juice boxes? I laughed, not loudly, more like a cough that escaped through my disbelief. "Sure, Mom, that's perfect." Her smile stayed fixed, and I realized this wasn't some last-minute logistics mix-up. It was a choice. They had planned it this way. I wasn't just overlooked, I was deliberately boxed out. Again. As I walked toward the sunroom, something in me cracked, not in a fiery, dramatic way, but like a seam splitting quietly under too much weight. The cousins I barely knew looked up at me for half a second before returning to their coloring books. I sat down. My knees bumped the plastic table. The centerpiece was a paper snowman with glue dripping from its eyes. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stared at the gravy boat on the adult table in the other room. My dad sat at the head like a king, flanked by his loyal heirs. And me? I was back in exile, punished for being different, for not marrying, for not birthing, for not ticking their boxes in the right order. They had made their statement. What they didn't know was that I was about to make mine. There's something uniquely disorienting about being in a room full of people you're related to and still feeling like an outsider. I sat at the kids' table, knees squeezed under a plastic folding surface covered in reindeer stickers and glitter glue. The air reeked of mashed potatoes and apple juice. My youngest cousin Claire was trying to balance a grape on her nose. I forced a smile. From my corner of exile, I had a perfect view of the real dinner party unfolding in the dining room. The adult table glowed in warm amber candlelight, each plate perfectly aligned, each wine glass filled to the brim. At the head of it all was my father, Richard Peters, stoic, composed, radiating that air of command he'd always carried like a second skin. His silver watch caught the candlelight as he lifted his fork. On either side of him sat his success stories. Jackson was mid-laugh, head tilted back, white button-down rolled at the sleeves like he was just another hard-working family man. His wife, Melanie, leaned into him with the practiced grace of someone who'd mastered the art of supportive silence. Their kids, Liam, Max, and Henry, had been wrestled into tiny blazers and were now causing polite chaos under the table, which everyone conveniently ignored. Then there was Lauren. My sister always looked like she stepped out of a home design catalog. Her sweater matched her lipstick. Her baby daughter's bow matched the table runner. Her husband, Kyle, nodded along attentively to my dad's story, even though I knew for a fact he hated small talk and football. Everyone was playing their roles beautifully. And me? I was the off-script character they didn't know what to do with, the one who broke the family rhythm by daring to live differently. I sipped from a tiny paper cup with Santa's face on it and tried to ignore the slow throb forming behind my temples. "Hey, Ava," Jackson called across the room, his voice carrying easily over the clatter of dishes. "You still living in Chicago, right?" "Still in Asheville," I replied with a stiff smile. "Been there 4 years now." "Oh, right," he said, turning back to his wine without missing a beat. "Thought you'd moved, or maybe that was just a vacation." He didn't wait for an answer. Barbara, my mother, glided into the room with a bowl of glazed carrots and a look that said she was both proud of her presentation and mildly inconvenienced by the timing of it. She placed the bowl down and ran her hand gently across Lauren's shoulder. "Sweetheart, that centerpiece you brought? Absolutely stunning," she cooed. "So tasteful. I think it really ties everything together." Lauren smiled like a pageant queen. "Thanks, Mom, it's nothing really. Just something I threw together last minute." Of course it was. I picked at a piece of stuffing on my paper plate. Cold, mushy, probably from the batch that didn't make the adult table cut. "So Ava," Dad said suddenly, his voice louder than necessary, "are you still doing that food thing?" "You mean working as a culinary program director?" I replied, eyebrows slightly raised. "Right," he chuckled, eyes darting around the table. "Just wasn't sure what to call it. Sounds creative." Creative? The word hung in the air like a leftover insult. To him, creative was code for not serious. I swallowed the irritation and leaned back in my chair. "It's been going really well. We just partnered with a nonprofit that teaches nutrition in public schools. I'm heading the curriculum development." Silence. Lauren reached for the wine bottle. "Oh, that's nice. So, do you travel a lot then?" "Not really. I work from the Asheville office." "Oh," she said, then looked back at her husband like the question had answered itself. "It's funny, isn't it? They act like they're curious, like they're listening. But really, they're scanning for validation that you're still behind them, still figuring it out, still not a threat." "Actually," I said slowly, carefully, "I've been thinking about opening a small culinary studio next spring, a teaching kitchen." That got my mom's attention. Her eyebrows lifted just slightly. "In Asheville?" I nodded. She smiled politely, but her voice tightened. "Well, just make sure you have a backup plan, honey. Things like that, they can be risky. Like having 3 kids before 30 isn't?" I felt the familiar burn behind my eyes, but blinked it away. I wasn't going to cry over carrots and condescension. Not again. Then Jackson chimed in. Hey, at least you don't have 3 tuition bills and a mortgage, right? Enjoy the freedom while it lasts. There it was. The oldest sibling jab disguised as a joke. The crowd chuckled. My mother laughed just a bit too loud. My father smirked. I looked at them, this golden tableau of respectability, and something clicked into place. They didn't mean to be cruel, not directly, but every comment, every dismissive nod, every glance that slid past me, it all stacked up. And it always had. I wasn't failing to meet their expectations. I was never even invited to try. Suddenly, I couldn't hear the conversations anymore. Just the sound of my own pulse rushing in my ears, the clink of silverware, the scratch of a chair leg, the hollow sound of laughter that didn't include me. I stood up, quietly, not storming, not making a scene, just moving. The adults didn't notice. The toddlers barely looked up. I grabbed my coat from the entryway, the echo of my boots against the hardwood the only signal that I was leaving the show early. You'd think I'd be used to it by now. The subtle digs, the dismissive glances, the constant reminders that I'm not quite like the rest of them, but it still hits different when it comes from your mother, with a smile on her face and her voice dipped in honey. After I slipped away from the kids' table and stood in the hallway, coat in hand, I took one more look around the house. The kind of glance people give before walking out of a place they know they won't return to. I wasn't storming out. Not yet. I just needed a second to breathe. The walls felt too tight, the air too thick with judgments masked as jokes. I could still hear laughter trickling in from the dining room. Lauren's tinkly laugh, Dad's booming approval, Jackson cracking another wine-fueled one-liner. A play I wasn't invited to, even though I'd shown up in costume. I walked toward the foyer, hoping to slip away quietly, but that's when I heard it. Heels on hardwood, moving quickly behind me. Ava? Mom's voice cut through the silence. I turned. Barbara stood there, one hand on her hip, the other adjusting her cranberry-colored sweater like she was smoothing out a wrinkle that didn't exist. "Where are you going, honey? We haven't done dessert yet," she said, smiling in that way she always does when she's trying to look composed. For the room, for the family, for herself. "I just needed a break," I said carefully. "It's a lot." Her eyes flicked to the door, then back to me, narrowing slightly. "It's Christmas, Ava. Everyone's here. Can't you just stay present? For once?" I blinked. That sting crept up again, low and hot in the chest. "I am present, Mom. I'm literally standing right here." She sighed, the kind of sigh that carried years of unsaid things. "Look, I know the kids' table wasn't ideal, but with all the high chairs and boosters, there just wasn't space." "That wasn't the problem," I replied, more firmly now. She folded her arms. "Then what is, exactly?" I hesitated, but she asked. "You made a choice, Mom. You didn't forget. You put me there. You looked at your 29-year-old daughter and decided I still belonged with toddlers, because I don't have a ring on my finger or a baby on my hip. That table was your way of reminding me." Her expression shifted. Not guilt, not shame, just controlled offense. "You're reading too much into it," she said. "It was about logistics, not status." "No," I said. "It was about optics, and you know it." Her smile vanished. The room suddenly felt colder. "You always find a way to make things about you," she said quietly. "It's exhausting." I stared at her, stunned by how calm she sounded, as if I had manufactured this whole thing out of thin air. "You think I want to feel like the outsider?" My voice broke slightly, despite my best effort. "You think I get some thrill out of showing up here year after year, only to be reminded I'll never be enough for any of you?" Something flickered in her eyes then, something fragile. But it passed. "Your sister brought dessert from that French bakery you like," she said instead, like a peace offering, or maybe a deflection. "Stay, have some." I swallowed hard. "This isn't about croissants, Mom." "I'm trying," she said, voice tight. "Do you know how hard it is keeping this family together? Your dad's health, Jackson's work stress, Lauren juggling everything. Do you ever think maybe this isn't easy for me either? I do think about it, I said. I've thought about it my whole life. That's the problem. I've always made room for everyone else, but no one's made room for me. She didn't respond. The silence between us stretched long enough to make the air feel heavy. Do you want me to apologize for not having kids? I asked, softer now. For not being married? For building something on my own terms? Barbara exhaled slowly, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. I just want peace. You want peace, I echoed. Or compliance? A beat passed. You've always been so independent, she said at last, but it didn't sound like a compliment. I nodded once. Exactly. I turned, hand on the doorknob, heart pounding. Behind me, she spoke one last time, barely above a whisper, as if she didn't even mean for me to hear it. You always make things harder than they need to be. And there it was. Not shouted, not cruel, but sharp enough to cut through years of trying. It wasn't the table. It wasn't the paper plates or the juice boxes or the cold stuffing. It was the confirmation that no matter how much I grew, succeeded, or showed up with open hands, they would always see me as difficult, as less, as the one who didn't fit the frame they built for family. I didn't say anything else. I just walked out, the door clicking shut behind me like the punctuation on a sentence I should have finished long ago. Outside, the snow had thickened, the air bit at my skin, but I didn't rush. I let the cold wash over me. It was sharp, honest, unlike anything that had happened inside that house. I climbed into my car, shut the door, and let the silence wrap around me. The engine rumbled to life, headlights cutting through the white blur ahead. For a moment, I just sat there, hands gripping the wheel, heart thudding steady. Then I whispered to no one but myself, that was the last time. The door shut behind me with a soft click, but inside it might as well have been a bomb going off. My mother didn't chase me. No one did. And that silence, that indifference, hit harder than anything she could have said. I stood in the cold, blinking up at the porch light haloing in the falling snow, wondering how I could feel so invisible in a place where I was born. Maybe I shouldn't have come at all. But I did. I showed up. I smiled. I wore the sweater Mom gave me last year, the one I pretended to like. I brought the bottle of Pinot she always says she loves. I sat at the kids' table and didn't complain, until she made it clear that was exactly where I belonged. And yet, after all that, I still hesitated before getting into my car. Because no matter how broken a house feels, part of you still hopes someone will swing open the door and say, "Hey, we see you. We were wrong." But no door opened. No footsteps on snow. No voice calling after me. Just the muffled hum of a holiday dinner continuing without me, as if I had never existed at all. I didn't drive far, just enough to leave their street behind. 5 blocks later, I found a diner with a flickering neon sign and an empty parking lot, the kind of place that served pancakes at midnight and didn't ask too many questions. I slid into a booth by the window and ordered black coffee and a grilled cheese, even though I wasn't hungry. I just needed something warm, something real. The waitress didn't smile much. She didn't have to. Her indifference felt like mercy. My phone vibrated on the table. Once, twice, then again. I flipped it face down, because I knew what the messages would say. The same script every time. You're overreacting. Come back. Don't ruin this for everyone. But for once, I wanted to ruin it, because this wasn't a tantrum. This was the result of years, no, decades of being told, subtly and consistently, that I didn't measure up. That marriage licenses and diaper bags somehow outweighed ambition or independence. They'd never said it outright, of course. That's not how my family worked. Instead, it was, you'll understand when you have kids, or it's different when you're married, or my personal favorite, you've always been a little free-spirited. Code for, we don't take you seriously. The waitress refilled my coffee without asking, and I thanked her with a nod. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, steady, and relentless. Like time, in a way. Covering up what was underneath, reshaping everything, whether you asked it to or not. I reached for my phone, hesitating for a breath, then unlocked it. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications, 13 missed calls, 22 messages. Chris, Lauren, Dad, even a few from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. But the one that stung the most was from Barbara. Mom, Ava, where are you? We need to talk. This isn't funny. Don't be dramatic. There it was, that word again, dramatic, as if asserting myself even quietly was a performance, as if leaving was a tantrum instead of a boundary. I stared at the message, fingers hovering over the screen. Then I pressed block. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. I sipped my coffee, letting the heat ground me, letting the moment stretch. This wasn't about a table anymore. It never had been. It was about them never once asking what mattered to me, never recognizing that my milestones, no matter how different, were still worth celebrating. I'd started my own career from scratch. I'd built a life I was proud of, alone. I had peace. I had purpose. But they never saw that. They only saw a missing husband, a missing child, a missing chair at their precious adult table. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone again. This time, I opened the family group chat. The messages were flooding in. Chris. Come on, Ava. This is ridiculous. You can't just walk out like that. Lauren. We didn't mean anything by it. Can you not make a scene? Dad. Grow up. We're trying to enjoy dinner. And then the one that stopped me. Mom. You're ruining Christmas. Don't make this about you. My thumb hovered. Then, slowly, I began to type. It's not about Christmas. It's about being sidelined every year. It's about being treated like a child because I didn't follow your checklist. I'm not the problem. I'm just not pretending anymore. I hit send. The text appeared blue in the thread, sandwiched between guilt and gaslighting. I watched the little gray typing bubble appear almost instantly, but I didn't wait for their reply. Instead, I leaned back, looked out the window, and let the silence settle. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't asking for a place at the table. I had made my own table, in my own life, and maybe they'd never sit with me there. But I was finally okay with that. It didn't happen with shouting. No slammed fists, no flipped plates, no grand declarations across the room. That's not how I was raised, and that's not how I wanted to leave. When I left that house, it wasn't an explosion. It was a closing door. Quiet. Final. After sending the message in the group chat from the diner, after that one deep, shaking breath that felt like the first full inhale I'd taken all evening, I just sat there, watching the steam from my coffee curl up toward the ceiling like it was escaping too. I kept thinking, what now? What happens when you finally say something you've held back for years? When the fear of disappointing everyone is finally outweighed by the need to be seen? My phone buzzed. Once, then twice, and again. They'd read it. I could picture it. Dad reading the message in silence, his jaw tightening. Chris muttering something about me making drama. Lauren giving her usual tight-lipped diplomatic sigh. And Mom, Barbara, probably rereading every word, searching for a way to spin it back on me. But I didn't open the messages yet. I wasn't ready to let them pull me back into the narrative. I wasn't sure where I'd go. I just knew I couldn't stay there. About an hour later, I was driving back through the snow-covered streets of Asheville, not toward my parents' house, not toward any familiar place, really. I wasn't planning a confrontation. I didn't want one. But I wanted to feel the weight of the moment, to mark it, not with noise but with intention. So I pulled over at the edge of the old neighborhood park, just 2 blocks from the house, the same one I used to sneak away to as a teenager when the noise inside got too loud. Back then, it was music in my headphones and hands tucked in jacket pockets, trying not to cry under the oak trees. Now, it was just me, 29, with a full-time job, an apartment I loved, and a life I'd built on my own. But standing in that familiar silence, I still felt like the girl who never quite belonged. I let the engine idle, then I cut it. Just listened to the snow hit the windshield, and then I made the decision. Not out of anger, not out of rebellion, out of clarity. I pulled back into the neighborhood around 8:40 p.m. Their house was still glowing like a holiday postcard, warm light in every window. laughter faintly audible even from outside. You'd never know someone had walked out of that dinner. You'd never know a daughter was missing. I parked half a block away. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want anyone watching. I walked up the stone path, boots crunching with every step. My coat was buttoned to the neck. The wind bit at my cheeks. Through the dining room window, I could see them. Chris with a beer, Lauren refilling her glass, Jackson wrestling his kids into sweaters, Dad standing near the fire, hands in his pockets, Mom fussing with the dessert trays like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't happened. I took one more breath. Then I stepped onto the porch. The front door wasn't locked. Of course not. They never worried about things like that around here. Everything was safe, as long as you played your part. I opened it slowly. No one noticed right away. The hallway was quiet, just the faint hum of Christmas music from the speaker in the living room. I could smell nutmeg and vanilla from the kitchen. Someone had lit the pine-scented candle Mom only broke out for company. I stepped inside, walked toward the coat rack. My boots made soft thuds on the hardwood, louder than I wanted, but not loud enough to cause alarm. I reached for my overnight bag still tucked in the corner, grabbed my gloves, my scarf, my dignity. That's when I heard her voice behind me. "Ava?" Barbara stood at the edge of the hallway, eyes narrowing like she wasn't sure if I was real. "Where are you going?" I didn't flinch. I turned to face her fully. "Home," I said simply, pulling on my gloves. "It's Christmas Eve," she said, her voice climbing. Not loud, but sharp. "I know," I replied, "and I won't ruin it by staying." Her lips parted slightly, as if she was about to say something clever or guilt-laced, but nothing came out. Maybe she saw in my face that I was done. Not angry, not dramatic, just done. She blinked. "Wait, Ava. I came. I showed up. I even sat at the kids' table." My voice didn't rise, but the emotion behind it was a steady current. "But I'm not staying where I'm not welcome. Not anymore." She took a step forward. "You are welcome." "No," I said gently. "You welcome the version of me that fits. That plays small. That laughs off the insults and sits quietly in the corner. But the real me? The adult who's lived her life without your approval? That version makes you uncomfortable." I pulled my scarf tighter, and I won't apologize for her. Her face was pale, and for once, she didn't have a response. So I walked past her, down the hallway, past the tree, past the years of memories pressed into every photo frame. No one else noticed. They were too busy laughing at something Jackson said. Just as I reached the door, Barbara spoke again. "Ava, please." I turned the knob. "Enjoy your dinner," I said softly, and walked out. The air outside was colder now, or maybe it just felt that way because my heart had finally stepped into open air. There was no turning back. Not this time. I climbed into my car, turned the key, and pulled away without looking in the rearview mirror. Because the thing about making a quiet exit? You don't need to look back. I didn't have a plan, just adrenaline in my veins and a steering wheel under my hands. I drove without music, without a destination, just silence and headlights cutting through the snow. It's funny how quickly everything can unravel. One minute, you're sipping cranberry punch next to your niece's art project. The next, you're fleeing your childhood home like it's on fire. But no flames, no smoke. Just emotional heat. Just the slow burn of being erased, one condescending comment at a time. I kept thinking, where do people like me go on Christmas Eve when home isn't home? Then I saw it. An old 24-hour diner just off the highway. A neon sign flickered half-dead over a near-empty parking lot, the kind of place where no one asks questions and every booth smells faintly of syrup and bleach. I pulled in. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, brushing snow off my coat. A waitress in her 50s, hair pulled into a tired bun, pen tucked behind her ear, looked up from her crossword and gave me a nod. "Sit wherever," she said, her voice as worn as the seat cushions. I slid into a booth by the window. The vinyl stuck a little from the cold. Outside, snow fell steady, soft and silent. Inside, it was quiet. A couple in the far corner, a trucker dozing in a booth, and me. I ordered a cup of coffee and a slice of pie. Apple, because it reminded me of fall in Asheville before everything got cold. The first sip of coffee hit like a shock. Too hot, too bitter, but real. For the first time all night, I wasn't performing, not smiling for appearances, not waiting for someone to notice I existed, just me and the quiet. My phone buzzed on the table. One new message. Mom. Then another, then two more. I turned the screen over. Not yet. Not while I could still hear myself think. I looked around. The couple in the corner was arguing in hushed tones, but they were still holding hands. The trucker snored softly, a half-eaten plate of hash browns in front of him. It made me wonder, how many of us end up in places like this on nights we're supposed to be surrounded by family? How many of us are quietly breaking in booths just like this one? I wrapped my hands around the mug. My fingers still trembled from the cold, or maybe from everything I'd left behind in that house. Did I do the right thing? That question kept floating to the surface, no matter how many times I tried to push it down. What kind of daughter leaves on Christmas Eve? What kind of daughter walks away from a table, even a plastic one, because of where she was told to sit? But then I remembered the way Mom looked at me, not with anger, not even disappointment, but with that tight-lipped tolerance, like my presence was a box checked off, like I was a responsibility to manage, not a person to welcome. And that's when I realized something brutal. It wasn't just about tonight. It was about every time I'd been quiet when someone made a dig about my single lifestyle. Every time they asked if I was dating anyone yet, with that raised eyebrow and forced smile. Every time I accomplished something, got promoted, published, recognized, and they nodded politely and moved on to Jackson's weekend barbecue or Lauren's daycare drama. I wasn't part of their picture. I was a postscript, and this year, I just couldn't. My pie arrived, warm, flaky, too sweet. I took a bite anyway. Then I flipped my phone back over and looked at the messages. Mom. Ava, please call me. We just want to talk. Lauren. You're scaring Mom. Can you just let us know you're okay? Chris. This is childish. Come back before you blow this out of proportion. Dad. Enough. Come home. It was like a chorus of voices, all saying the same thing. You're the problem. Not one of them asked why I left. Not one of them acknowledged their part. I opened the family group chat. There it was. Dozens of messages stacked like bricks, each one trying to rebuild the narrative. She's being dramatic. She always does this. We didn't mean anything by it. She needs to grow up. And yet no one mentioned the kids' table. No one said, "We see you now," because they didn't. Not really. I stared out the window. The snow was falling heavier now, softening the world into quiet shapes. I imagined my footprints outside the house already gone, covered like I'd never been there. And in that moment, I felt something shift. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't angry. I was free. Because leaving didn't make me weak. It made me honest. It made me real. It was the first time in my life I chose myself, even if no one else did. The waitress passed by again, nodding at my empty mug. Want a refill? I looked up. Her eyes were kind, tired, not nosy. Yeah, I said. Why not? She poured. The steam curled up again, soft and alive. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, "You don't get to decide where I belong anymore," and I hit send, not to lash out, not to punish, but to draw a line in the snow before it all melted away. I thought the quiet would last longer, but silence, like most peace in my family, has a time limit. Back at the diner, the coffee had gone cold. I didn't touch the pie anymore. My hands rested on either side of my phone like I was bracing for impact, and right on cue, it began. Buzz, 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 buzz. Each vibration felt like a knock on the glass box I'd finally escaped. And just like that, the guilt machine roared to life. I turned the screen over and stared. Chris. Ava, this isn't funny anymore. Where are you? Lauren. Mom is freaking out. We just want you back. Dad. Don't act like a child. Get back here. No. Are you okay? No. We're sorry. Just commands. Expectations. Accusations dressed in concern. I sank deeper into the booth. Here's the thing about guilt. It's not always loud. Sometimes it arrives as soft responsibility. Sometimes it wears your father's voice. Or your sister's gentle panic. Or your brother's irritated tone that makes you feel like you broke something sacred. I locked the phone, set it face down again, tried to breathe, but the words clung. Don't act like a child. The irony? I'd left because I finally acted like an adult. I set a boundary. I said enough. And instead of being met with understanding, I was being pulled into their narrative again. In their story, I was the problem, the runaway, the unstable one who ruined the photo. But here, in this booth, with a cracked sugar dispenser and the smell of burnt bacon lingering in the air, I was just a woman who finally said no. I opened my phone again, despite myself. Lauren, we can't believe you'd leave like that. Christmas is about family. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Mom, Ava, this is not who you are. Come back and we'll talk. Don't be selfish. That one stopped me. Selfish. The word hit like sleet to the face, as if all those years of accommodating, adjusting, over-explaining meant nothing, as if walking away from being humiliated was somehow a betrayal. I stared at Mom's message, trying to find some hint of softness between the lines, some acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, she understood why I left. But it wasn't there. Instead, it was the usual spin. This isn't about you. You're making it worse. Come back before it's too late. I scrolled further. Chris, you left Mom in tears. Was that the goal? Dad, we're not perfect, Ava, but you just walked out on your family. That says a lot. And there it was, the weight being placed back on me, like I'd detonated something, like I'd set the whole table on fire instead of slipping out the front door in silence. I wanted to scream. Instead, I grabbed my phone, opened the group chat, and stared at the blinking cursor. My fingers hovered. I could have told them everything. The pain, the alienation, the exhaustion of being the quirky one, the modern one, the one they never quite knew what to do with. I could have unloaded years of swallowed words, of biting my tongue every time they dismissed my career, every time they whispered about my untraditional life like it was something broken. But I didn't. I wasn't ready to shout. So instead, I typed, I needed to leave. That's all you need to know right now. I hit send. Simple, firm, unapologetic, for once. The typing bubbles popped up instantly. I locked the phone again. The waitress returned, refilled my water. Her eyes lingered for half a second longer than usual. Not nosy, just human. You okay? She asked softly. I hesitated, then nodded. Just a weird night. She gave a small, knowing smile. Aren't they all during the holidays? I almost laughed. She walked away, and somehow that small moment, the way she didn't ask for details, didn't push, felt more like family than anything I'd had all day. I unlocked my phone again. More messages, more pressure, more performances begging me to take my seat in a story I never agreed to be part of. But this time, something in me shifted. I didn't feel afraid. I felt awake. I felt like the fog I'd been living in, the one named Keep the Peace, had finally lifted. And what I saw underneath was someone who deserved better. If I'd stayed, nothing would have changed. The table would have been cleared. The wine would have been poured. The photos would have been taken, minus me, of course, and life would have gone on. But so would the roles. And I'd played mine long enough. My phone buzzed one last time. Mom, you're tearing this family apart. This isn't who you are. I read it twice, then 3 times, and I smiled, bitter, small, but real. Because she was wrong. This was who I was now. Someone who didn't stay where she wasn't seen. Someone who left when staying meant breaking. Someone who chose herself for once. I stood up, left a few bills on the table, grabbed my coat. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was ink black and wide open. I breathed in the cold air, felt it sting the back of my throat, and whispered to the night, they don't get to write my story anymore. Some people throw punches with fists. My family prefers group chats. I had just returned to my apartment. The snow was still clinging to my boots, melting into little puddles on the entry rug. The quiet was thick, too thick, like the air after a fight when no one's sure what happens next. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and stared at it. It had been 20 minutes since I left the diner. I thought maybe they'd stop. Maybe my silence would finally speak louder than their noise. But then came the ding, then another, and another. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I opened the family group chat, already bracing myself. Chris, you've made your point. Now stop being petty and come back. Dad, enough with the attitude. This is family, not some protest. Lauren, we didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Why are you blowing this up into something bigger? Mom, Ava, you're acting like a stranger. This isn't who we raised. And that was it. That one line. This isn't who we raised. My blood turned to ice. Because no matter how polite their words were, the message underneath was always the same. You're wrong for reacting. You're wrong for feeling. You're wrong for not falling in line. I took the phone and walked to the window, watching the snow fall under the glow of the street lamp. My reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, tired, but something else, too. Steady. They wanted me to fold, to feel shame, to question myself, but I didn't. Not this time. I sat down on the couch, pulled a blanket over my knees, and opened the chat. The blinking cursor was waiting. I cracked my knuckles, an old nervous habit, and then I began to type, slowly, carefully, clearly. You still don't get it. You think I left because of a chair, because of some table. But this wasn't about tonight. It never was. I paused. My heart pounded. But the words kept coming. It's about how I've been treated every year. Every comment, every dismissal, every time you acted like my choices were cute or temporary, like my life didn't start until it looked like yours. My fingers moved faster now, carried by years of swallowed silence. You celebrate each other's lives, marriages, babies, promotions, but you've never once asked what mine looks like beyond a surface-level question. You say I'm difficult. No, I've just stopped pretending I'm okay being ignored. I could feel my breath getting shorter, but I wasn't done. I'm not ruining the family. I'm refusing to disappear into it, and if that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe it's time you ask why. I hit send. The message went through. Blue bubble. Clean. Final. Then I stared at the screen. Waited. The replies came fast. Almost panicked. Chris, this is ridiculous. We didn't do anything to deserve this. Dad, stop being so dramatic. Everyone feels out of place sometimes. You're not the only one with problems. Lauren, we're trying, Ava, but it's really hard when you make us walk on eggshells all the time. My jaw clenched. There it was again. The reflex to deflect, to diminish, to defend. No one said, we hear you. No one said, we're sorry. Just more proof that I was right to leave. But then something unexpected happened. A new message popped up. Mom, Ava, I didn't know you felt this way. I really didn't. Maybe I should have asked. Maybe I didn't listen the way I should have. I stared at the screen, blinking. She hadn't apologized exactly, but it wasn't nothing. I read the message twice, then locked the phone without replying. I wasn't ready to let it in. Not yet. I curled up tighter on the couch, the blanket pulled up to my chin, and let the tears come. Not loud, not explosive, just steady, like everything else tonight. Because I hadn't planned to fight. I hadn't wanted this to become a standoff. I just wanted to matter. It's strange how clarity comes at the most inconvenient hour. I realized that this text, this moment, was the first time I had ever really said no to them, not just in words, but in action. And the truth, it felt terrifying, but it also felt right. Somewhere outside, a car passed, headlights casting brief shadows on the wall. My apartment was quiet, safe, mine. And in that space, I began to breathe again. The kind of breath that doesn't ask permission. You'd think that after a message like mine, raw, honest, long overdue, they'd stop and reflect. You'd think someone, anyone, would pause and say, maybe we hurt her more than we realized. But no, that's not how my family works. I should have known better. The morning light cut through my blinds like a quiet accusation. I hadn't slept much. The coffee I brewed didn't help either. It just gave my anxiety sharper edges. When I finally picked up my phone again, there were more messages than I could count. Notifications stacked like bricks, one over the other, from Chris, from Lauren, even from relatives I hadn't spoken to since the last funeral. The group chat was alive, buzzing, spinning, twisting. Chris, what exactly do you want from us? We can't change the past, Ava. You're blowing this so far out of proportion. Lauren, I'm sorry you feel hurt, but none of us ever tried to make you feel excluded. That was never the intention. Dad, you're being emotional. This is why it's hard to talk to you about anything serious. We try, and you take everything the wrong way. Every line was like salt poured calmly onto a wound. No yelling, no curse words, just that steady undercurrent of we're still right, and you're still difficult. And beneath it all, the quiet implication that my pain was just a misinterpretation. Not real, not valid, just emotional. I closed the messages. My hands trembled slightly. I felt like I was back in high school, sitting at the kitchen table while my report card was skimmed over for spelling errors, but never praised for the A's. Like when I won a local cooking competition and Dad said, well, maybe someday you'll get on a real show. Or when Mom referred to my apartment as my little phase before real life starts. It was always the same dance. You're not what we expected, so we're going to edit you until you are. Another message pinged. Mom, Ava, this is all getting out of hand. We didn't raise you to behave like this. You're acting like we're the enemy. That word again. Raised. Like I was some half-finished project they'd misplaced the manual for. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring out the window. The city outside was quiet, heavy with snow. Everything blanketed in white. Still, peaceful, unmoved by my storm. And then I opened the chat again, scrolled, read. The conversation had shifted. They were now talking about me in the thread, like I wasn't reading it. Chris, she always does this. Makes herself the victim and expects us to apologize for things we didn't even do. Lauren, I think she needs help. Like real help. It's not normal to just leave like that and cut everyone off. Dad, she'll come around when she realizes she overreacted. She always does. I stopped breathing for a second. Not because I was shocked. I wasn't. I was devastated, but not surprised. Because this was the pattern. Push me out, blame me for leaving, rewrite the story. And when I come back, pretend nothing happened. But I wasn't coming back this time, and they could feel it. That's why they were scrambling to control the narrative before it slipped out of their hands. I stood up, pacing slowly. The room felt smaller now, even though I had more space than I ever did in that big family house, because I wasn't grieving a single night. I was grieving a lifetime of being misunderstood, of being tolerated, but never embraced. I thought of every time I'd been told I was too sensitive, too opinionated, too dramatic. And what they really meant? Too hard to manipulate. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Lauren. You can't just leave and expect us to chase you forever. You're tearing the family apart. There it was. The final card. Guilt. Not even wrapped up anymore, just placed on the table like an ultimatum. But I didn't flinch, because I saw it clearly now. They weren't scared of losing me. They were scared of losing control of how the story would be told without me. So I walked to my kitchen, poured another cup of coffee, let the silence wrap around me. Then I unlocked my phone and, for the first time since the storm began, opened the chat and took a photo. It was one I hadn't looked at in years, a family Christmas photo from 2014. Everyone smiling. Jackson's kids in matching sweaters, Lauren's perfect hair curled just right. Mom and Dad posed like they were auditioning for a holiday commercial. And me? I was in the back, cut off at the edge, half cropped, half seen. Just like always. I sent it into the group chat. Then I typed, this was the year I realized I was only allowed to be part of the family if I kept shrinking. So I stopped. Merry Christmas. And then I turned off my phone, tossed it on the couch, and let the silence win, for once. Every family has a picture like this, the kind that gets framed and placed on the mantle like a trophy, a carefully curated moment. Everyone smiling, everyone together, a lie with good lighting. It was sometime past noon when I found it. I was sitting on the floor of my living room, back against the couch, still in the same oversized sweatshirt I'd worn the night before. The blinds were half closed. My phone had been silent for hours, which should have felt peaceful, but instead it felt like a held breath. I opened the photo gallery on my phone, not really knowing why. Maybe out of habit, maybe searching for something to hold on to that didn't hurt. And that's when I saw it. Christmas, 2017. I remembered the moment vividly. The scratchy red sweater Mom insisted I wear. The way Dad called out, "Everyone smile," like a coach ordering a play. The 10 seconds where we were all told to pretend. Pretend we were happy. Pretend we were equal. Pretend I wasn't already slowly disappearing from the family frame. And there I was, on the edge of the couch. Literally. Half of my body cut off by the Christmas tree, one arm tucked awkwardly behind Lauren's toddler. No one touching me, no one leaning in. If you didn't know better, you'd think I was just passing through, like I had photobombed my own family. I zoomed in. My smile was small, tight, the kind you wear when someone tells you to just be grateful you're included. That was the year I brought homemade cinnamon rolls for breakfast. The year I spent hours trying to make conversation with Chris about his work, only to get brushed off for football scores. The year Mom asked, in front of everyone, "Do you ever get lonely in that little apartment of yours?" I had smiled, like I always did. I had played along, like I was supposed to. But this photo? It captured everything I hadn't said out loud. I stared at it for a long time, let the silence stretch. Then I took a screenshot and opened the group chat. It was still there, quiet but unread. My last message had left a trail of chaos that no one seemed eager to clean up. Good. Because I had one more thing to say, I attached the photo. Captioned it simply, "Here's to the perfect family. Always making sure the youngest one knows her place." I hit send. The reply came faster than I expected. Mom. "Ava, what is this? Why would you do that?" Lauren. "This is low, even for you." Chris. "So now you're digging up old photos to make a point? Real mature." Dad. "Grow up. Everyone looks happy in that picture. You're just being vindictive now." There it was. Not one of them asked what the photo meant, just outrage that I dared to show it. Because in their eyes, the worst crime isn't the years of exclusion, it's breaking the illusion. I stared at the phone. The picture was still there, glowing on the screen like a quiet scream. I didn't reply. Instead, I scrolled back through the gallery. Birthday dinners where I was off to the side, arms crossed. Vacation photos where I wasn't invited. Baby showers where I showed up but wasn't acknowledged. Always there, always quiet, always pretending. That's the thing about invisibility. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in pieces, in positioning, in who gets cropped. And this time I was done pretending I couldn't see it. My phone buzzed again. A new message. Not in the group chat this time. A direct text from Lauren. "Why are you doing this? I thought you were stronger than this. You're hurting Mom. You're hurting all of us." That one stung. Because I think, in some twisted way, she meant it. But I also think she never really knew me at all. I started typing, then paused. I deleted the message, typed again. "You're upset because I finally showed what I've been living with for years. Not because it's wrong, but because now it's visible. Sent. No emoji, no soften the blow punctuation. Just the truth." And then I turned off my phone. Not muted, not silenced, off. I placed it face down on the coffee table and walked to the window. The snow had stopped. The world outside was frozen in place, but it looked cleaner somehow, like a new canvas, untouched. I touched my reflection in the glass. The same face from that 2017 photo, but different now. Eyes that no longer needed permission to speak. A mouth that didn't smile just to make others comfortable. A woman no longer standing on the edge of the couch. The call came just as the sun began to fade behind the rooftops, casting long, orange shadows across my apartment floor. I had been sitting in that same spot on the couch for what felt like hours, wrapped in a blanket, half watching the light change, half watching the blank screen of my turned-off phone. I'd made it through the storm of group chats and passive-aggressive texts. I'd dropped the photo that said everything I couldn't yell. I'd told my truth and silenced the noise. But part of me, an old, bruised part, knew this moment was coming. The ringtone shattered the quiet. One long vibration. A name glowing on the screen. Mom. I stared at it, thumb hovering. I didn't want to answer, but I didn't want to wonder either. I took a breath that reached all the way to my toes and pressed green. Hi, Ava. Her voice was soft, controlled, but I could hear the exhaustion laced through it, like a woman holding too many things together for too long. I've been trying to reach you. I know, I said. Silence. Then, can we talk? I didn't answer right away. My eyes flicked to the frosted window where the streetlights had just flickered on. She sighed, a sound I'd heard my whole life, usually when I asked too many questions or didn't smile on cue. I don't know what's gotten into you, she continued, but this has gone far enough. There it was, the pivot, the shift from concern to control. I stayed quiet. She filled the space. You're pushing everyone away. Your sister's crying, Chris is furious, your father, well, you know how he gets. I did. That wasn't new. But this, Ava, this is not who you are. I closed my eyes. Yes, I said. It is. Her breath caught, like I'd slapped her. I didn't soften. This is who I am now, Mom. The version of me that doesn't shrink. The one who finally got tired of being tolerated instead of loved. Oh, honey, don't be dramatic. Stop calling it that, I snapped, sharper than I meant to. It's not drama, it's dignity. Another silence, then more carefully. We've never tried to hurt you. You know that, right? No, I said quietly. You've never tried, but you did. She went quiet again, and for the first time in the entire conversation, I could tell she didn't have a script for this version of me. The daughter who didn't apologize for taking up space. The daughter who stood her ground. You're making this so complicated, she said finally. It's Christmas. Can't we just go back to how things were? And there it was, the ask to rewind, to erase everything uncomfortable and slip back into the neat little narrative where I sat quietly at the kids' table, smiled through the slights, and came when called. I can't, I said. Not this time. She exhaled slowly. A long pause stretched between us. Then she said something that stopped me cold. Do you think I ever had the luxury of choosing myself, Ava? My throat tightened. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't blaming. She was vulnerable. No, I said honestly. I don't think you did. And that's when I heard it. Cracks in her voice, the kind you can't fake. All I ever wanted, she whispered, was for everyone to stay close. I just wanted to hold it all together. But you didn't see who you left out in the process, I said, my voice barely holding steady. You kept the picture perfect, but I was disappearing right in front of you. She didn't argue. She didn't defend, just sat in the truth of it. It was the first time in years I felt like she wasn't speaking at me. She was listening. I don't know how to fix this, she said finally. I swallowed the lump in my throat. You don't have to fix it right now, I replied, but you do have to see it. A long silence followed. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. I'm sorry, Ava. I felt something catch in my chest. That child inside me, so used to being dismissed, corrected, overlooked, didn't know what to do with that sentence. I didn't respond right away. Then, I'm not asking to be the favorite, Mom. I'm just asking to be real, to be seen. I hear you, she said. I really do. I closed my eyes. For a second, I let myself believe her. Not because I thought everything would magically change, but because maybe for the first time, something had started to shift. I need time, I told her. I understand, she replied. Just don't shut the door forever, okay? I gave her the only answer I could truthfully give. I don't know yet. And that was enough. We said goodbye. I hung up. And for the first time all day I cried. Not from anger, not from exhaustion, from release. Because something cracked open between us, not wide, but enough to let air in, enough to let truth breathe. And maybe, just maybe that was a start. Christmas morning in Asheville was unusually quiet. No alarm clock. No scent of cinnamon rolls from someone else's kitchen. No nieces banging on the door with frosting in their hair. Just me, the soft hum of my radiator, and snow falling gently outside my apartment window, undisturbed, untrampled, untouched. I sat on the floor in front of my tiny artificial tree, a mug of peppermint tea in my hands, still wearing the old hoodie I'd thrown on the night before. A few fairy lights blinked behind me, casting soft shadows on the wall. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't curated for a photo. It was mine. And it was enough. Last night's call with my mom still echoed in my chest. The quiet apology, the uncertainty in her voice, the admission, small as it was, that maybe she hadn't seen me clearly all these years. But it wasn't the apology that gave me peace. It was the fact that I didn't chase it. For once, I didn't beg to be understood. I didn't rush to patch up the silence. I didn't explain myself into exhaustion just to be allowed back into a room that never really made space for me. I let it be. And somehow that silence felt like peace. I glanced at my phone. Still no new messages, no calls, no guilt-tripping paragraphs, no follow-ups asking if I'd calmed down. And honestly, that emptiness felt like a gift. Not in the bitter, I don't need anyone way, but in the I finally know what I deserve kind of way. I stood up and pulled on my coat. The sidewalks were still dusted in white. I walked to the corner cafe, my favorite one, the one with mismatched mugs and jazz playing softly in the background. A couple sat by the window, their heads bowed over a shared crossword. The barista gave me a smile I didn't have to earn. "Merry Christmas," she said, sliding over a cup I hadn't even ordered. My usual. "Thanks," I replied. "You too." I sat in the corner, watched the snow fall, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. I thought about the girl I used to be, the version of me who showed up year after year, arms full of gifts, heart even fuller with hope, hoping to be heard, hoping to be invited to the adult table, hoping that this would be the year someone would ask her how she was doing and actually stay to hear the answer. But now I saw that girl clearly, and I felt nothing but love for her. She tried so hard to make herself small enough to be held by people who never opened their arms. And still, she showed up. I didn't regret walking away this year, not because it was easy. It wasn't, but because it was necessary. There's a kind of grief that comes with choosing yourself. You mourn the version of love you always hoped your family could give. You mourn the fantasy of being finally accepted for who you are. But on the other side of that grief, there's clarity, there's power, and yes, there's freedom. As I sipped my coffee and watched a kid outside build a lopsided snowman, I let myself smile. Not for anyone else, just for me. Because this Christmas didn't come with perfection or matching pajamas or a table set for 12. It came with stillness. It came with honesty. And it came with the courage to say, I matter, even if I have to stand alone to prove it. Later, I took the long way home, stopping by the lake where the water was glassy and still. I sat on a bench dusted with snow and pulled out my journal, the same one I'd kept hidden in my nightstand for years, the one full of words I never dared to say out loud, until now. And I wrote, "This is the Christmas I stopped performing. This is the year I stopped apologizing for growing up differently. This is the day I chose peace over proximity." And it was the most honest holiday I've ever had. I've learned that love without respect is just obligation, and family without recognition is just shared history. But the moment you stop begging to belong, you begin to build something stronger, something that doesn't ask for permission to exist. And this was the beginning of mine. So if you're listening to this and wondering if it's okay to walk away from a table that no longer welcomes you, the answer is yes. You're not wrong for asking to be seen. You're not broken for needing more. And you are not selfish for choosing peace over tradition. This was my first Christmas of freedom, and while it didn't look like the holidays on TV, it looked exactly like truth. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever left behind the noise just to hear your own voice again, please hit like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what did you leave behind to finally come home to yourself?